Hello, my name is Dr. Richard O'Connor. I'm here this evening, May 19th, 2022, to have a conversation with Reverend Barry Downing, who has asked me simply to call him Barry. And we're here to talk about his book, which I'll hold up here. It's called Biblical UFO Revelations. Did Extraterrestrial Powers Cause Ancient Miracles? By Reverend Barry Downing. And I've read this book once, and I'm partially through it the second time. I think it's a very important book for our times, although I realize that this is not the first foray for you, Barry, in writing a book about this subject, that you have actually been addressing this this interest, the sort of a hypothesis that you have for, I guess, more than 50 years. You've been involved in this. Is that correct?
That's correct. I wrote The Bible and Flying Saucers in 1968. So
68.
That's over 50 years ago. And that was the same year that Eric von Daniken published Chariots of the Gods. So those books came on the market the same year.
Was that by design or just coincidental?
If it was design, it wasn't my design. Okay, it was a higher power than mine. I'd never heard of him, and his book didn't start fast, but it really got a boost when NBC TV did a series called In Search of Ancient Astronauts.
Okay.
That was the early 1970s. And
well, it's kind of amazing to me that these two books came out sort of simultaneously, that long ago.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And people see us as both ancient astronaut theorists. This is why I was asked to be part of the Ancient Alien series, but von Daniken was the big voice and mine was a little voice. And I appeared in about 10 or so of the programs, and it boosted sales of my book because they always put the title of my book on the screen when I was speaking, so I was grateful for that. But the general tenor of the Ancient Alien series is this. Ancient aliens who've been here in the past, they did a lot of scientific stuff. Ancient people mistook them for gods who came down from the skies. Ancient people were not technological. They didn't know better than to worship these beings. And von Daniken paid attention to some of the more primitive colonies in the islands of the Pacific who would make little fetishes out of airplanes and things like this, hoping for the gods to return, And so he felt that this is what was going on in biblical times. Chapter 4 of In Search of Chariots of the Gods is entitled, Was God an Astronaut? And of course, his answer is no. Aliens were mistaken for gods, okay? So he's basically getting rid of the God of the Bible by turning the angels into space guys who have no interest in God. All right, how did he do this? He went to Ezekiel, and Ezekiel saw his wheel, and there was a being in it who Ezekiel addressed as God, but the God of the universe, the great universe, does not need a flying saucer to fly around and give me a break, or a wheel within a wheel. So that was just an ancient astronaut, and Ezekiel didn't know any better than to worship him as if he were God. Then he turns to Genesis chapter 19, and that's a very big deal because in Genesis 19, two beings who claim to be from God, two angels, go to the city of Sodom and knock on the door of Lot, Abraham's relative, and say, you got to get out of town. Now, what happens is Lot takes these two angels in for the night, and the men of Sodom surround the house and say, throw those guys out. we want to play with them, you know?
Hmm.
And Sodom doesn't, or rather Lot doesn't do it. And in the morning, Lot gets out of town with his wife and children, and the wife is warned not to look back, or something bad will happen. And she looks back and turns into a pillar of salt. Now, what does Von Daniken make of this? This is not God working. This is a bunch of Asian astronauts who, for some reason, apparently see the people of Sodom as a bad genetic mix.
Hmm.
They don't want their DNA. So they decide to get rid of them. How'd they destroy them? It reminds me a lot of a nuclear weapon going off. They got the smoke goes up in the sky after the big boom happens. So that's Von Daniken's approach to basically getting rid of God as the source of what's happening in the Old Testament. All right.
Uh-huh.
He hardly dealt with the Exodus. He
Hmm.
sort of brings up the Ark of the Covenant way later in the book, but he doesn't do it under the chapter on was God an astronaut. He doesn't mention the pillar of cloud and of fire, which is the main UFO of the Exodus.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I focus on very early in chapter 3 in the Bible and Flying Saucers, and also in chapter 4 in the book you just held up. I summarized what I argued about the parting of the Red Sea in the book you just showed on camera here.
Okay.
The
Maybe this would be a good time for me to bring up the slides that you wanted to show.
It's a very good time.
Okay.
Put up the first slide that shows the text of Exodus chapter 14, okay? Can you get Exodus 14, or do you have to put up the pillar of cloud first? That's Exodus 14, that's right, if you can put that up.
Uh-huh.
All right. The Exodus story says in chapter 13 that after the Jews were freed from Egypt, they were led by an object that I would call a UFO or a spaceship. It's called the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to lead them by night, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. So Exodus states here that this UFO was with the Jews throughout their 40-year Exodus journey. Now, what's it going to do next? It leads them up to the Red Sea, which the text says is a strange move because they're going to get followed by Pharaoh and his 600 chariots. They're all going to die for this maneuver, unless the pillar of cloud has the technology to part the Red Sea, which we know happened, but I can't imagine the Jewish people knew that this UFO had the power to split the waters of the Red Sea, which is what happened and saved them. Now, on the screen, you see the pillar of cloud moved from before Israel and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there's the cloud and the darkness and the night passed without one coming near the other all night, which means when the UFO led Israel up to the Red Sea, the army of Egypt followed behind, and the UFO left from in front of Israel to the rear and settled on the ground to keep Egypt from clobbering Israel until it got dark. Then under cover.
Maybe I should see if I could bring up another slide now.
Go ahead.
This one I think illustrates sort of how you envision this may have looked.
Right. Under the cover of darkness at first, the power, whatever propulsion power is here, split the waters of the Red Sea and also produced a tremendous amount of heat that dried out the seabed. For the text says 3 different times, Israel crossed between walls of water on the right and on the left, and they crossed on dry ground. They felt the dry ground as much a miracle as the walls of water. Why wasn't it muddy? Well, a lot of heat came from above and dried out the seabed. And then Israel, as you can see in the far part of the distance, they're on the other shore safe, and yet they looked back and saw the army of Egypt on their way. And they said, my God, what kind of a miracle is this? You saved us, and now you're going to let the Egyptians come in the open channel and kill us anyway. That's not much of a miracle. Suddenly something happened. The chariots stopped operating properly. And what the text says in chapter 14, verses 24 and 25, then the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud looked down upon the host of the Egyptians and discomfited the Egyptians, breaking off or locking up their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And then Egypt said, let us flee from before Israel, for they fought for us against the Egyptians. And then the walls of water collapsed. The power was turned off. What I think happened is some type of special heat mechanism was focused on the axles and hubs of the chariot wheels, and that caused them to lock up. And the Hebrew here has been hard for translators to translate. In the RSV, they said that they basically clogged up the wheels of the chariots, thinking they got stuck in mud. But the text says there was no mud, it was dry. Now,
so that
if you go,
is this I guess this slide is not really what you were just talking about.
no, I want to go back. If we want to go on to the next slide, show the one previous to this. The one with the kind of red blue eye. You see the blue eye? There you are. That's it. That's the one you want.
Okay.
By the way, this painting was done by Lynn Merrifield at my request, as well as the Parting the Red Sea one. She did several paintings on my behalf. Her mother was a member of my church, and her mother introduced us. She was an excellent artist, and she was interested in my UFO topics. So that's how I got to have these paintings. What we have in this scene is the pillar of cloud and fire hovering over the tabernacle or the tent of worship. And this was built at Mount Sinai under the direction of, I think, the ETs that were leading the Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
So what my argument is, the ETs started the biblical religion on purpose. This was not some kind of people stupidly being taken in by some ancient aliens and they didn't know better. The ETs developed the Jewish religion on purpose. And that included giving them the 10 commandments, giving them 613 commandments of the Jewish religion. The commandments included building the house of worship, which is the tabernacle, which is a tent that could be collapsed and then carried on poles until they get to a new location. What we see here is the pillar cloud, the Exodus UFO hovering over the tabernacle. And Moses, we assume, might be in the tabernacle helping carry out worship. The tents of Israel are all scattered around the tabernacle itself. Mm-hmm. Now's a good time to move to the next slide, which shows the text of Exodus 33. The wrong way. That's the wrong one. That's 14. Keep going. There it is. Now, this is Exodus 33, verses 7 through 11. And what you got is the scene I just showed you with the pillar of cloud over the tabernacle. Now, Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose up, and every man stood at his tent door and looked after Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the door of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. When all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the door of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, every man at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And when Moses turned again into the camp, his servant Joshua of Nun did not depart from the tent. So what we have here is a description of an event that happened frequently during the Exodus. Moses would pitch the tent of the tabernacle. Everybody pitched their own tents. And when Moses put out to the tabernacle to conduct worship, everybody would pay attention. And the pillar of cloud then would drop down at the door of the tent, And Moses would talk to somebody who I assume is what we would now call an ET. Okay.
Okay.
And he was the one that was referred to as the Lord by Moses and by their followers.
Yeah.
So the question is, can we see these ETs as godlike, as angelic, or perhaps embodying God in a way we don't, in our age, believe in anymore or understand? But in any case, these are the questions I think that have to be asked and have not been asked so far.
I agree. I find your hypothesis fascinating, very plausible in light of what we know to be true today. And it's one of the objections that I have about all of the Abrahamic religions as they exist today is that they just don't seem to be willing to address what we know is going on in our world. We have some type of visitors that are here with us. The amount of information that has grown over the past 7 decades to support that contention just continues to grow. And in fact, our own government is now admitting that these UFOs, or UAP as they like to call them, are real. They are real physical objects. And although they've not been willing to admit a lot more about them so far, I think that's coming. I think we're in the process of learning about this. And do you think that
I hope you're right. Okay. Did you watch the congressional hearings on Tuesday?
I did. They were very disappointing. I think very
Yes.
misleading. Yes.
Yes.
And
you notice they brought the Malmstrom UFO incident at the Air Force Base, which you've done with Robert Salas. Okay.
Yes.
And neither of these guys ever heard of that.
They looked at each other like, oh, yeah. You ever heard of Malmstrom Air Force Base? No, right. It was unbelievable.
And what kind of a briefing could they possibly have had if it did not include the Malmstrom case?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing that I would have said to them if I were a member of government there, you guys ever hear of Alan Hynek?
Yeah.
And if they said yes, okay. He was on Project Blue Book advisor for 20 years. Do you know that? Yeah. And do you know that when the farce called The Scientific Study of UFOs, led by Edward Condon, shut down Project Blue Book, that a very few years later, Alan Hynek said, when I was on Blue Book, all the best cases went right to the Pentagon, not to me. And then I said, are you guys going to get the good cases, or are you just another front like Project Blue Book? That's what I've said to those guys.
Yeah. Well, I hope that that's not the case. I hope.
Yes, we all do.
They seem to be trying to limit the data from 2004 onward and ignore 70 years of deception and misinformation and disinformation. And they're trying to disentangle themselves from that. And I get it. I understand why they want to do that, but I don't think that that's going to be possible. Eventually all of the truth is going to come out. And, in my opinion, what we need to do is Congress needs to pass laws that give judicial amnesty to everybody that's been involved in this cover up for as long as it has existed, so that we can get out the truth, so that we can get to the bottom of this, because it's imperative that we do.
I agree that would really do it. That would do it. But I can't imagine the political pressure coming about to make that happen. My guess is there's not more than 3% of the American population that really cares how the UFO stuff works out. I mean, you are one of the lone rangers in this business, you see. And I know you care, but how widespread is this kind of caring to put political pressure on congressional members,
Right.
Well, I wish you were right.
I think trying to get our fellow citizens to realize just how impactful this subject, this reality is going to be on our civilization is huge, you know. And this subject that we're talking about tonight, the relationship between UFOs and religions, is just one aspect. I think it's a very important aspect of one of the impacts that it's going to have, and it's probably one of the primary reasons I believe that our government has not wanted to engage the people with this subject, because it is going to radically transform our views in religions. And I know in your book you said that you don't feel that it's going to destroy religions, and I agree with that, but it's going to dramatically change how we interpret events in the Bible, who is God, and whether or not our religions are able to make that jump, and how quickly, I think, is a big question, but it definitely needs to happen.
Well, what the UFOs do is raise the possibility that evolution didn't just happen, okay?
Mhm.
That evolution wasn't simply a whole series of accidents that we got lucky about. It
Right.
looks like this UFO reality has been here for a long time, and it's more likely that they have guided the development of life on Earth rather than just sitting on their hands in their flying machine saying, I wonder what's going to happen next, you know?
Right.
I see the ETs as kind of God's farmers, okay? And the Earth is God's farm. And farmers don't let crops grow by accident. You know, my grandfather was a farmer. He planted corn in his field. He didn't sit in the house and say, gee, I hope I get a good crop of corn this year. Of course, I'm not going to plow the field. I'm not going to plant anything. I'll just kind of hope for evolution out there in the field and see what happens, you know? That's
Right.
not how it is.
No, it
So
doesn't.
I think that the ETs are here as managers, and that the Earth became like it is through a managerial process, and a long time getting here, but still, it wasn't just a series of accidents. And I
Right.
think even if there were no religions, that idea would begin to push itself on us if the Pentagon came clean and stopped lying. Okay.
Well, the more we learn, the more we learn about, for example, the abduction phenomenon that's associated with this UFO phenomenon, we realize that there is apparently a genetic program that's going on, and probably has gone on for as long as we know, you know. And if that's the case, then perhaps, you know, mankind, Homo sapiens sapiens, may have been a genetically engineered species, you know, going way, way, way back. And if that's the case, then it certainly seems very reasonable that those that genetically engineered mankind would have a vested interest in instilling in us a sense of ethics and morals, and giving us a you know, an algorithm to follow in order to help lift us out of the animal kingdom and move us toward what most of us could maybe term, you know, the divine. Not to say we'll ever get there. Maybe we won't. Maybe the nuclear weapons will take us out before we manifest our fullest potentials. But if that doesn't happen, then perhaps we will owe a great deal of gratitude and debt to these engineers who may have helped bring mankind about. I think that's not implausible. I don't know how you see that, but
I don't think that's implausible either. In chapter 8 in the book you held up, it's entitled Biology, Dominance, Christ, Antichrist. All right.
It's in this book.
Yeah. And so I assume you've read chapter 8. And you talk about bringing us out of the animal into something more godlike. And
Yes.
godlike would have ethics that animals don't have.
Yes.
What are the ethics of animals? They're willing to kill, they're willing to steal, they're willing to commit adultery or have sex with anything that'll stand still, okay?
Right.
They're willing to look with envy on their neighbor's food or property. They'll fight for territory, the whole deal, okay?
Uh-huh.
And the ethics of Jesus is anti-dominance.
Mhm.
So that if he would be first among you, must be chief servant. Okay.
Yes.
And
Uh-huh.
that's what Christianity preached for 2,000 years. And it looks to me like we've mostly forgotten it because we're all scrambling to be number one, be
Right.
the top dog, to be the winning team, to be the dominant power in the world. And that's where your nuclear weapons come in. If you don't have the best weapons, you aren't going to win in today's world. And that's all animal stuff,
Right. Right.
It's
Right.
the animals. We're animals. We don't fight with teeth. We don't fight with claws. We don't fight with horns. We fight with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And this gives us just a little bit too much dominating power, enough to destroy ourselves.
It is interesting that nuclear weapons are, they may turn out to be they've made war kind of obsolete, you just can't use them, period. And there's no question that we need to get rid of them. And I think that that's exactly the message that we can read from why these interventions that Robert Salas and David Shindeli and other, Robert Hastings, the author Robert Hastings,
Yes.
in his book UFOs and Nukes.
UFOs and nukes, right?
He's brought this news to us that these events have happened, and it's imperative that we start asking the question: why have they done this? What are they trying to teach us? And if they are the same,
the Pentagon may not like this news.
Yeah, I suspect they don't.
They may not want some extraterrestrial power saying, you have to give up your nuclear weapons. You have to give up these types of powers to maintain your dominance.
Right.
And we're not going to do it if the Russians have them. What are you thinking? We're not going to give them up. Let the Russians give them up first, then we'll give them up,
Right.
And you got Putin saying, I might use nuclear weapons. So he's playing nuclear chicken, two cars racing at each other like teenagers. Which one's going to turn away first,
The game has changed with Putin having invaded Ukraine and now threatening to use nuclear weapons. He's just escalated the stakes, really.
Right. So reasonable men would say we can't possibly use nuclear weapons. But the strange thing that the struggle for dominance, the animal struggle for dominance is, you see it at sporting events, okay? Mm-hmm. We try to conduct our sporting events with referees and all the action is very reasonable, but careful, a little bit violent, but no actual fighting. And then suddenly a fight breaks out in a basketball game and we say the refs lost control, okay? Well, emotions when you're trying to be dominant get really carried away. And I don't think that in our ethical education of our children now, nothing like that, I think, happens in our public schools because we can't talk about keeping our animal nature under control with ethics, which may come from religious traditions, because that's putting religion in public schools and that's separation of church and state and all that. So even though religion, I think, could help in the situation we're in now, in America, the hands are kind of tied, and I don't know what to do about it. And you talked about whether or not the Pentagon is worried about the religious impact of releasing UFO information. My guess is they're worried. My guess is they were worried right at the beginning, all right? You ever hear of Donald Menzel?
Yes, yeah, I have. He was a debunker, I think, of
yes. See, he was the early Philip Klaus. Okay. And once he died, then I think Philip Klass took over.
Yeah.
Do we know that the government, the Pentagon, paid these guys to be the debunkers, or did they do it free of charge? We don't know.
We don't know.
But in any case, yeah, there was something on the internet that I found called the Psychological Strategy Board. You can Google it. Committee of something UE executives, Operations Coordinating Board. This is back in the 1950s. And when you read Donald Menzel's Wikipedia biography, toward the bottom, it mentions this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And you look up that what it was is a propaganda outfit run by the CIA.
Yeah.
And the feeling was that he was encouraged to or hired by the CIA to write his debunking books about UFOs. Okay.
Right.
And so that whole debunking thing didn't accidentally happen. It was planned by the people in the Pentagon.
Oh, it became an art form.
Yes.
So getting back to UFOs and religion, and recalling these events that we know have happened, despite the fact that the UAP task force or the AIMSOG newest rendition of UFO debunkers, really, we do know that nuclear weapons have been disabled on many occasions at many different nuclear weapons installations across our country and in Russia. There was also an event that took place in Jerusalem in January of 2011 when a UFO was filmed from 4 different perspectives by 4 separate parties, descending down over the Temple Mount, hovering over the Temple Mount for 23 seconds, and then just shooting like, you always hear people say it went off like a bullet. Well, you can actually see that happen in these videos. It does exactly that. It just goes vertically straight up into space like a bullet, okay? So we have this event that happened in January 2011. Tomorrow, there's going to be a film released called Ariel Phenomenon, produced by Randall Nickerson. And that film is a documentary film about the event that took place at the Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe in September of 1994, when a UFO landed on the school grounds. And I think it was about 60 school children who were out there, saw this happen, walked up to it, actually had a telepathic exchange with this being that they all described and drew pictures of. And that film is going to be released tomorrow. And I recommend that everybody see Ariel Phenomenon, produced by Randall Nickerson. You can find
now these children are all grown up now.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
what, in their 50s? How old are they?
They must be in their early 30s, late 20s, early 30s.
Okay, younger than I
maybe
thought.
mid 30s. Yeah. Anyway, my point is that we still have these things going on today. If I read about these things, I wouldn't be surprised to see these exact same kinds of stories having shown up in a Bible that was written 1,500 years ago. They sound exactly the same tenor, the same kind of amazement, the same kind of incredible impact that it would have on anybody that saw any of these kind of things happen, So my point is, why is it that religions of today focus so much on what happened 2,000 years ago, and they don't seem to be focusing on these are miracles. I'm sorry, I'm going to call them miracles that are going on right now under our noses in this world today. And everybody's like, oh, well, so what, or, oh, that didn't happen. That's not real. Those people are lying. I just don't understand why religions of today are not looking at this stuff and saying, this is real, this is the same kind of stuff that we saw happening, that we wrote about in our holy Bible and in probably the Quran or the Talmud, and the other holy books.
Seems like deliberate blindness. It seems like what Isaiah said: seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, and
right.
and so they're blind to what's going on. And or Jesus said, it's the blind leading the blind,
Right. Yeah.
I think it's, in one sense, you got to condemn the human race for the fact that we've had these UFO sightings now by the thousands, good reports from reliable people. And the press has kind of suppressed it. Has the Pentagon told them to suppress it? Probably. But do they have to obey the Pentagon? Not completely. There's all kinds of UFO stuff on the internet. There's, so the culture has been saturated with the idea of visitors from another world. So that's not shocking. What is it that religious leaders have ignored this totally? I don't understand that. And not only have they ignored the fact that this UFO reality is there, but I've said, hey guys, it's in the Bible too. Don't you think you want to look at this? No, we do not want to look at this. And so
at least not from that perspective. They don't want to look at it from that perspective, right? Yeah.
All right, there's two prevailing perspectives. If you're a theologian, you get paid to do your theology in a certain way. If you're a liberal, you're paid to point out that things like the parting of the Red Sea and the resurrection of Jesus are mythology from ancient people, and we don't believe this stuff anymore. But we think that religious things like love and stuff are okay, so we can still sort of be religious, Or if you go at it from a fundamentalist point of view, yeah, I believe the Red Sea parted. Why do you believe the Red Sea parted? Because it's in the Bible, and the Bible is inerrant. Every letter in the Bible, every word in the Bible is inerrant. So if it's in the Bible, I believe it. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Yes, because it's in the Bible, okay? And if you're a scientific person, you're saying, wait a minute, just because a book says something doesn't mean you should accept it critically without thought,
Right.
Oh yes, this is God planned for the Bible to be inerrant, and that's what I believe, okay? And so if you're a fundamentalist theologian at a conservative campus, how do you explain the parting of the Red Sea? It was supernatural, okay? Yeah. God has supernatural power. With God, all things are possible. God did it. I don't need any explanation. In fact, the first Presbyterian pastor that I explained my UFO ideas to about the parting of the Red Sea said, God doesn't need to bother with that. God can do anything. Why are you bothering doing all this work, So that's the kind of greeting I got from a fellow Presbyterian when I tried to explain some of my ideas. But so you got the fundamentalist view and the liberal view. The liberal view is the parting never happened. It's a myth. The fundamentalist view, of course it happened. It's in the Bible, therefore it must be true.
But it's like they want to keep everything mired in what people understood 2,000 years ago instead of updating to what we understand to be true today. An example I would give is a hologram. And if we look at the holograms we have today, at least when you look at one two-dimensionally, they look very convincingly like a person walking or turning, or you've probably seen these full life-size holograms of a person doing different actions. They had some in the Salt Lake City airport for a long time that people could just come up and observe. Well, what if you took the technology that we have today with holograms and just put it 100 years down the road? We'll have holograms that walk, talk, do calculations, So it's like these fundamentalist people, they want to keep everything like we understood it 2,000 years ago and not allow us to appropriately, I think, try to upgrade our understanding of what is said in the Bible about what happened and try to interpret it in terms of what we understand to be true today. That's kind of my take on it.
All right. If the angelic reality that appears in both the Old and New Testaments represents some type of advanced universe, okay?
Mhm.
And if what Jesus talked about is the kingdom of heaven, is that advanced universe,
Mhm.
then we have no idea what kind of stuff may be going on there that's way beyond anything we can do. And we shouldn't be shocked if these UFOs show up and do stuff that we can't figure out how it's done and our technology can't match it. Well, fine, it's heavenly technology. There you are. And do you have any idea what that means or what the limits to it might be? And no, I don't.
Right. We don't, but we have a better idea of it today than we had 2,000 years ago, when we had essentially no idea about what people were seeing. What were they looking at? They had no clue, because they had no frame of reference to make any kind of an assessment of it. So it was all angels, it was all divine. But
Supernatural, whatever, divine, yes.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so now, you see, I don't know whether the biblical idea of angels and our modern ETs can be merged into the same reality, but I think they can, and I think that's what has to happen.
Yeah.
But the way the biblical people talked about the ET reality doesn't fit the way we think about it. And so part of the problem is merging two different cultural concepts of what ETs are. And
Right.
which
brings me to another point. You get online and you see a lot of people, especially fundamentalist religious people, that are talking about these being demons or Satan or fallen angels, and you discuss a lot of that in your book. And we can speculate all day long about who they are, where they're coming from, how they're getting here, what their intentions are. But yesterday, when you heard the question posed to Bray and Moultrie about had there been any attempts to communicate with them, they said no. And I feel like if we want the answers to these questions, we're going to have to figure out a way to communicate with these beings. I mean, they're obviously intelligent enough to communicate with us if we will just make, I think, an honest, sincere, earnest effort to do that. And the experts that our government has at their disposal in communications, if they were to try to do this in a peaceful and transparent way, maybe that could happen, and maybe we could get some of these answers in a more definitive way, or at least answers that we could then go back and assess their responses to. But until we try to do that, we're going to be left in this situation where we're speculating who they are, and are they angels, or are they fallen angels, or are they Nephilim, or what?
Stephen Greer has tried to kind of reach out in prayer or in prayer groups for that kind of thing.
Right.
So I think it's not like nobody's thought of it. All right. I want to take my biblical perspective on exactly what you're talking about here.
Okay.
The idea that we would try to talk to the ETs seems perfectly reasonable, and we would hope the ETs would want to talk to us.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading one UFO story, and I can't cite the book or anything, but an Air Force pilot came back, landed his plane, and was totally shot mentally, totally shocked. He'd been sent to chase a UFO, a flying saucer or whatever. And when he came back, he wouldn't talk about it, couldn't talk. What they found out later, as I understand it, is that the ETs broke in on his radio and talked to him, okay? Mm-hmm. And that absolutely blew his mind, okay? He had no psychological power to cope with that kind of empower, you know?
Mhm.
And I think that to some extent, well, I belong to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, just got my latest MUFON journal, and the director had a list of things that the presidents of the United States have said about disclosure, you know? And what Bill Clinton said was, I can't answer the questions about UFOs because it's handled by a totally different department of the government.
Uh-huh.
All right. It said that Donald Trump was all set to release the information he had about UFOs, and I think that included the the New Mexico crash and all that kind of stuff at Roswell. But in any case, he didn't do it because the ETs got a message to him that it would be too disruptive to do it all at once. It needs to be gradual. Okay.
Mm.
How did this communication come through? The implication is there's some link somewhere that the ETs already are telling some guys who I assume are in that part of the government that Bill Clinton can't touch, that are managing this in some way. That's the implications. Now, is that true? Or is this a lie that the Pentagon's handing out so we have confidence in their management? I don't know. But going back to, we'll say, Exodus, back to Egypt, back to Pharaoh and Moses. Moses came to Pharaoh with orders, let my people go. God wants the Jewish people to go out into the wilderness for 3 days to worship me. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh said no. And then came plague number 1, plague number 2, plague number 3. There was real hostility between the ETs that rescued Egypt, or rescued Jews from Egypt, and the Egyptian power structure. I can't imagine that the ETs see the American power structure as much different from the Egyptian power structure that was bullying Israel. Yeah. I don't see America as the power that's being bullied, you know, like Israel was. We're the bullies. Mm-hmm. I don't think the ETs like bullies, which would mean they don't like Americans. Mm-hmm. So then, in terms of, you know, you saying, why don't we just talk to these guys? They think the guys in the ET booth are thinking, who do they think they are? We don't want to be friends with bullies, you know? Mm-hmm. We are interested in the meek, the lowly, the humble, and none of them are walking around in Washington, D.C. or in the Pentagon. Yeah. So as much as I like the idea of the ETs wanting to talk to us and to help us get out of the world mess we're in, and see the United States is very much part of that mess. Uh-huh.
Well, certainly Stephen Greer's CE5 that he calls these, and I like the way you characterize that as a prayer, sort of a prayer ritual in a way. That's what it is. I mean, telepathy, when we think of prayer and we think of telepathy, or just projecting our thoughts or ideas or wishes or requests or whatever it is out in the same form of what we would normally call prayer, I think makes a lot of sense. And so certainly your characterization of what Stephen Greer is doing, what Costa Macraeus of ET Let's Talk is another group that are regularly scheduling these movements of people to around the globe, really, trying to get them to sit down, meditate, and project out these thoughts of welcoming, kindness, peacefulness, transparency, a desire to not just to communicate, but also to cooperate in trying to bring peace to the world, and a little bit more enlightenment than we're enjoying right now. So maybe that's where the meek and the poor and the selfless and the servants can go to try to amplify this signal that Greer and Costa Macreus and others are trying to get across, rather than having some official government program engage in communication. Maybe it does need to come from a very grassroots effort from the people. And I like the way you put that as a form of prayer, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. How difficult has it been for you to navigate the waters of the Presbyterian faith while holding these kind of unusual, I guess, perspectives on the Bible and on what divinity might be in terms of angels and ETs and this kind of thing? Has it presented you with some real challenges? Like John Mack almost got drummed out of Harvard University because of his views of the alien abduction phenomenon being real. Has it been the same for you?
Not that bad. And I wrote a letter of support to John Mack. We both spoke at the California MUFON conference and enjoyed what each other said, and we corresponded some after that. And in one of his letters to me, he said it's really shocking that a secular Jew finds so much in common with a Presbyterian minister from upstate New York, But I would say, first of all, I was naive about how my book would impact the Presbyterian Church and the world in general. I thought there'd be a lot of people poo-pooing it, and then there'd be a lot of other books written. Well, this is what Barry said, the Bible says about the parting of the Red Sea, but I think it's more likely blah, 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 or this, or the pillar of cloud might have been this or that. Actually, we've had 3,000 years with nobody figuring out what the pillar, cloud, and fire is. I mean, somebody thought it might be a volcano, but a volcano isn't going to fly around through the sky and stop here and then go again and all that, which is what the pillar cloud did,
Right.
And a volcano isn't going to hover over the Red Sea and make it part, So Immanuel Velikovsky wrote his book Worlds in Collision, which he argued that the pillar cloud was the planet Venus making a near pass at planet Earth, and that it caused the Red Sea to part because of gravitational pull. Okay, none of that really worked. So here we are. We have an unexplained thing in the Bible, and
I would say not the only one, really. What about the Star of Bethlehem?
Well, sure.
That could be another example very similar to what you're talking about. We just don't know of any celestial objects that move slowly, guiding people somewhere, and then stop and hover over a target and focus attention on that target. What does that? Well, we know that the only thing that could have done that is a UFO, right? So
sure. One story that impressed me is a couple are driving their cars home down a road. UFO comes over the top of their car and flies ahead of them, 200-300 yards. They're a little scared, but they're on their way home. And so far, the thing hasn't done them any harm. They have a right-hand turn coming up. And by golly, the UFO turns right where they were supposed to turn right, And they go along a little further and go down the road, and then they've got a left-hand turn coming up to their own house, and it turns left right through their house and goes in the road and then hovers above their house a couple of minutes and flies away. Okay. What this says is, hi guys, we know you. You are tagged in our system. Okay. We punch our computer and your name comes up and we know exactly where you live.
Yeah.
And I think that Jesus said the hairs on your head are numbered. What I take that to mean is we're all well-known property, and they keep track of all of us. They keep track of you and me and everybody else. Now, in terms of the Presbyterian Church, several things I consider the grace of God in terms of not getting booted out of the Presbyterian Church. Okay. And The first grace was that when I got my first job, I was an assistant pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church. And that meant I was basically hired at the suggestion of the senior pastor. The senior pastor was George Reinick. When my name came up as a possible associate for his church, the presbytery office gave me my dossier. He read it. He found out I lived in Rochester, which is about 3 hours away from where the church was that I served for 30 years. In any case, he came to visit me. And he thought we were getting along okay. I said, there is something I ought to tell you. I've been writing a book. It's called The Bible and Flying Saucers. It might not go over well. I don't know. I just thought you should know about it ahead. Right. He said, oh, that's wonderful. Good. I hope it works out for you. Okay.
Wow.
So
he was open-minded about it.
Yeah. I started work on February 6th at Northminster Church. Was ordained on March 5th of 1967. And the book was rejected. I was just mailing it to the first republisher like Harper and Row. They rejected it. Sent it to another big house. They rejected it. Sent it to my Presbyterian publishing house, Winster Press. They rejected it. In my letter to Westminster Press, though, I'm not totally dumb. See, I said to the Westminster Press, I know you might not want this book, but if you don't, do you know of anybody that might want to print it? And they wrote back and said, yes. J.B. Lippincott is just down the block from us. Wow. And they have a religion department, and it's not a denominational department. They might be interested. They sent it there. That's how it got published.
Okay.
It got published about a year after I was ordained. Now, there was a stink. Stuff in the paper. Oh my gosh, local minister believes in UFOs and the Bible, blah, blah, blah. Terrible. And a couple of people did leave the church over it, okay, but not a lot.
Good.
And
well, I hope young people today will find in you some inspiration that, especially young people that are thinking about pursuing a life of clergy, some sort of dedication to religious service. I hope that young people today will take a look at your story, and they will find some inspiration in the courage that you have shown, which I would say took a lot more courage 50 years ago than it does today, to come out as a pastor and say, this is probably what happened. Let's reinterpret the Bible in terms of what we know today, what we understand with technology, and what this likely was. That took a lot of courage 50 years ago, and still would today. But I think you're an inspiring figure for those young people who want to pursue a career path like you did, but also feel strongly that they want to bring this material and this perspective, this new perspective, to our religions. We need that. Our world needs that now. So I'm grateful to you for how much you put into this, and for the courage you've shown over so many decades, to defend your point of view in a civil manner, to discuss it without seeming like a lunatic. That's what we need.
Just borderline lunatic. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got a lot more lunatics on the world today in regard to this subject than we did 50 years ago. There's a lot of people that are getting it now. People are starting to get it, that this is real. This is happening. This is something that deserves our attention. And so anyway, I really want to personally thank you for all you've done to help move this forward, because that's what it takes. Just like this video we're doing, a few people will watch this, and somebody might get inspired to move it a little, kick this can a little further down the road, and that's what we have to do.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, I guess, and I don't want to make this video too long, or nobody's going to want to watch it. So
that's fine.
Yeah. Have you pretty much said what you feel that you wanted to say about this subject?
Yes, all I would say is you're encouraging people to go where I've gone. I would say to people, what I've done is dropped a brick into a well, and I'm still waiting 50 years to hear the splash, okay?
Yeah.
So if you don't mind being ignored or rejected or laughed at for a long lifetime, go ahead and do what I'm doing, all right?
Right, right. I hope we get that splash pretty soon. And I think we're
I would
going
like,
to. I think we're going to.
okay,
And I hope it happens in your lifetime, Reverend Downing.
yes,
Yeah,
all right,
very
thank
good.
you.
Thank you so much for talking to me tonight.
All right, good night, Richard.
Okay, good night. Thank you.